and the lessons that we learn from each other. And so this year, we have formatted our FAOD Through the Ages sessions so there is ample time for not only the clinicians' presentations, but a question and answer time for both the clinician and other families and parent patients to respond. So as we get to the Q&A at the end of the presentation, if there is a question that is asked and you would like to share a personal experience that relates, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and share. Without further ado, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Aaina Kochhar. Dr. Kochhar is a board-certified clinical and biochemical geneticist. She trained at Mayo Clinic, Minnesota, and Stanford University in California, and has been in practice for the last 10 years. She joined the team at Children's Hospital Colorado in 2020. Dr. Kochhar has participated in peer-reviewed publications and clinical trials for rare diseases. She manages children with a variety of metabolic disorders in her clinic, including fatty acid oxidation disorders, urea cycle defects, amino acid disorders, and organic acidemias. She is passionate about improving outcomes and long-term quality of life for patients and their families with inherited metabolic diseases. Dr. Kochhar, thank you so much for joining us this weekend, and thank you for getting us started this morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Aaina. It's really exciting to be here and to talk to this group. And the focus of my talk today is talking about fatty acid oxidation, when your kids are young. See, make sure that it works. Maybe it's sort of stuck. It's not really, maybe I have to point it here. All right, so, we're not attempting to make you guys into biochemical gurus, but, it's important for us to talk about the biochemical pathways so that we can focus on the principles of treatment. I have a lot of text that shows up slowly, so I'm wondering what's the best way to do this? Do you have any advice? Point it this way? Okay. Let me see if it's better if I. Should I use this? All right, advance. All right, so these have all been my patients. 8-year-old healthy girl who plays recreational soccer but develops total body cramps during the game, or a 2-year-old healthy baby boy who's home, who's nursing, but it takes time for breast milk to come in, and so he develops lethargy, poor feeding, and becomes floppy, or a 2-year-old healthy boy who gets rotaviral diarrhea from his daycare. He's hydrated well with Pedialyte. Pedialyte doesn't have enough sugar, but becomes lethargic and floppy. Or, a 5-year-old with a known diagnosis who's a picky eater, fatigues and tires easily and has cardiomyopathy or poor functioning heart muscle. The presentations are variable, but the context in common is that all of these are kids who have fatty acid oxidation disorders. Okay, so fats are a ubiquitous part of our diet. We have plant-based fats. I think my pointer works. Okay, yes, it does. Okay. So, here we have plant-based fats, nuts, olive oil from olives, avocados. We have, animal-based fats, which is dairy and cheese, meats. And then we have the fats at the, that are just sort of part of our everyday diet, fun foods, pizza, burger, etc. The purpose of this talk is not to talk about these are healthy fats and these are unhealthy fats. Fats are just part of our diet, and all of us take in a proportion that some healthy, and some that, maybe is not the best for us, saturated and unsaturated fats. But what is it that these fats, do for us inside our body? Okay, so they're important because they are the main energy and blood sugar source during a medium and long-term fast. They're important for the skeletal muscle during sustained exercise, which could be anything like, it doesn't have to be an intense workout. It can be, walking for long periods of time, playing basketball or soccer, with your friends. It's important for the heart muscle. It's a preferred fuel when, glycogen stores are used up. And then, the breakdown of fats in the liver generates ketone bodies. We all know about ketones. It generates ketone bodies that are used by the brain as a fuel, during stress or fasting. So fats are really important. They're used by, big muscle groups in our body, skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, as well as by our brain. And then, they're used to sustain our body during fasting. So let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about, what happens after we eat our last meal. Our body is sustained by, the sugar that we get through our meal. And then as, we use what we need and we store what we don't in the form of something called glycogen that goes inside the liver. So a short-term fast, about 2 to 6 hours between your previous and your next meal, the body breaks down glycogen as a source of energy. A medium-term fast, which could be timing from, basically lunch to dinner, if you didn't have any snacks in between, as well as an overnight fast, we use fats, stored fats as a source of energy. And then you have a long-term fast, which is anyway for over 18 hours, where the body uses its own substrates to generate new glucose called gluconeogenesis. Important to know that these processes are interchangeable and your baby's dependence on these processes changes as they mature. Babies don't have any reserves, so they need a constant supply of food and calories, and that's why, babies eat every 1.5 to 2 hours. But as you grow and these physiological processes, they mature, the body's dependence on a continuous supply of calories decreases. Next. All right, so where is this oxidation of fats, to get energy actually taking place? Taking a cue from the name, of the meeting, it takes place in the mitochondria. This, graphic is just showing us a picture of the mitochondria inside the cell. So this is, going to spend a couple of minutes talking about this because the fats have to do a lot of work to actually get to the right spot to be broken down. The red outline is the outer mitochondrial membrane. The orange wavy outline is the inner mitochondrial membrane. And then, these sort of, let's see here. The space here is the mitochondrial matrix, where the beta oxidation takes place. Okay, so before we go into this, let's briefly talk about what is oxidation. It's a type of chemical reaction that results in the loss of electrons. And this loss of electrons generates energy. So in oxidation, somebody's losing electrons and somebody's gaining electrons. The example would be, fuel when undergoes combustion, is an example of an oxidation reaction. But oxidation is not just limited to the use of oxygen. It's just a historical name because one of the first loss of electron reactions described used oxygen. So fatty acids, they get oxidized, which means that they're losing electrons. As they lose these electrons, they donate them to the electron transport chain. And this process generates energy, which our body uses. All right, let me give it a try again. Was that me or was that you? Okay, all right. Oh, hold on. Okay. So, this is a brief schematic depicting how beta oxidation takes place. And I think, these going through a couple of, I won't go through many of these, I promise, but some of them are important because they help identify our principles of treatment. So let's say we're fasting, I had lunch and now I haven't had dinner yet and 6 hours are fast. My body will trigger, a message to the stored triglycerides or stored fat. And then through the process of lipolysis or fat breakdown, I now release free fatty acids that are floating in the blood. Next, please. Then these free fatty acids, now reach at the doorstep of the mitochondria. And in order to undergo beta oxidation, they need activation. This activation is by combining them with the coenzyme A molecule, so they form something called fatty acyl-CoA. Now that they're activated, they can't really enter inside the mitochondria. They need the help of carnitine. We're all familiar with carnitine. And so then now they combine with carnitine to form fatty acyl-carnitine. And then through the help of a shuttle system, they get transported inside the mitochondria. So, and once they're inside, they get converted back again into the acyl-CoA form so that they can undergo beta oxidation. So it's super complex process, lots of back and forth. But essentially, a fat arrives at the doorstep here, gets complex with the coenzyme A, then at the outer membrane, it gets complex with the carnitine, then it gets transported through a shuttle, then it gets converted back, and finally the acyl-CoA form is what gets oxidized. Next, please. Each spiral of beta oxidation shortens the fat by 2 carbons. This part is important. The ultimate goal of beta oxidation is to take that fatty acid and chop it down until it's completely gone. This is just a picture of the carnitine shuttle. It's complicated. We need, but I mean, these terms here, for some of you, it's your lived experience, but these are enzymes that are, important for transporting fatty acids inside the mitochondria. Next, please. Okay. And so what is the end game here? The end game is production of energy, and energy currency for the body is in the form of a ATP molecule. So you have a, sugar, a ribose sugar here, you have a nitrogen molecule, and then this is where the money is. These high energy phosphate bonds is what gives energy to the ATP. And so, without this ATP, you're low on energy. And this is, I think, one of the last biochemical slides. It's just showing us, I wanted to go through what happens when you undergo beta oxidation of a fat. So this is palmitate. Palmitate is a 16 carbon length fatty acid. It's basically palm oil that's present in, infant formulas. It can be present. It's a long chain fat. It's ubiquitous. It's present in chocolates. It's present in cooking oils. It's present in infant formulas. So as this C16 carbon fatty acid undergoes breakdown, its complete breakdown produces, these are the, next please. As you can see, 123 molecules of ATP are produced by breakdown of 1 molecule of a C16 palmitic acid. These words here, I'm just going to talk a little bit about them in the sense that these guys, FADH2 and NADH, remember oxidation was loss of electrons. These are the guys that gain those electrons and then transport them forward to produce energy. And this acetyl-CoA is something that, is a 2 carbon molecule. It's broken down separately to produce energy and also to produce ketone bodies. Okay, now that we are at the end of our brief biochemistry session, so really we're using fats to produce energy. This energy is used by multiple organs in the body. And so what symptoms could a person potentially have? Hypoglycemia. That's in an acute setting. So it's not hypoglycemia that you have constantly at all times. If you have a source of energy or calories, you're good, but this hypoglycemia is precipitated by an acute event. And this word hypoketotic here is something that's relevant for, your doctor that helps them think about fatty acid oxidation defects because you're not producing ketones because you're not breaking down fats. The heart muscle uses it. So you have cardiomyopathy, which means that your heart muscle is not able to pump enough energy, and the symptoms present as just generalized, fatigue, poor energy, and there can be heart rhythm disturbances. Muscle. So, there are many people with fatty acid oxidation defects, especially the long chains, who are well and healthy in their everyday life, but if they try and go do some exercise, do a hike, spend some time in the gym, or have a longer fast because of religious reasons, or, they're like on a diet, they can present with these symptoms, weakness, exercise intolerance, breakdown of muscle, rhabdomyolysis. You can also have liver disease. It's not a constant feature, but something that can happen during an acute crisis where, you can have fat deposits in the liver because you can't use it. And then those fatty deposits can cause can damage your liver, and it can be enlarged. And then, there's those of us who are asymptomatic. And what does that really mean? An asymptomatic individual is a person who has mild disease, but maybe have just not faced those stressors in order to manifest these symptoms. So the advent of newborn screening has really changed this for folks, especially who have MCAD. And we'll talk about that as as we go along. Next, please. Okay, so the types are medium chain fatty acid oxidation disorders and long chain. The one thing I needed to mention during the biochemistry part is that entire carnitine shuttle transport system, I only need it if I'm breaking down a long chain fat, because it's the long chains that can't enter the mitochondria. If I'm a medium chain fat, I can go directly in. I don't need that huge process. And the names of these disorders are derived from the carbon length of the fat. So if you have a fat that has 6 to 10 carbon atoms, it's called a medium chain fat. If you have a fat that has about 12 to somewhere around 18 to 20 carbons, then you have a long chain fat. And so there can be disorders of transport or disorders of enzymes that break them down. And you can see, they're different, and we'll go through them. Next, please. Okay. These are recessive. We do a lot of genetic testing now. Some of you may have had genetic testing for yourself or for your kids. It's not perfect. It's reading the sequence code of the gene in order to find the mutation or code switch, that causes your enzyme not to function right. It's not perfect, but it's currently the gold standard, for diagnosis when combined with biochemistry. We think about people who have mild disease and who have severe disease. And the difference lies, in their genetic mutation. So if you have a mutation that completely knocks out the enzyme activity, which we refer to as a null mutation, you have no backup, no reserves, you're going to have severe disease, which means that you're going to be symptomatic, on a general basis, or even with, sort of a mild trigger. Versus people who have mild disease or those who have genetic mutations that, which cause their enzyme activity to be 15%, 20%. It's not 100% that's normally supposed to be, but it's enough that it can sustain them during their everyday life without symptoms, and they only are symptomatic when stressed by triggers. So, that's sort of the difference. You may hear somebody is mild, somebody is severe. The disorder is the same, and it depends on, lots of factors, including how much enzyme they have. All right, so how do we manage this? At this point, we have no permanent cure for fatty acid oxidation disorder. So, what we are left with is understanding the disease and managing it in order to minimize the impact, on our everyday life. In essence, living with a fatty acid oxidation disorder. The number one thing is avoid your dependence on, going towards beta oxidation of fats as a source of energy. So avoid physiological stress, such as illness, prolonged fasting, exercise without sufficient energy intake. If you have severe disease and you can't really use very long chain fats as a source of energy, then modify diet, limit dependence on long chain fats as an energy source, use more medium chain fats, provide alternative sources of energy, which could be carbohydrates, which could be protein, or which could be pharmaceutical grade, sources of calories such as Dojolvi. Acute illnesses, if all else fails and you land up in the hospital, during your illness, then supportive care with dextrose containing IV fluids for an acute illness. The dextrose or sugar doesn't fix the illness, but, it supports your body as the GI bug or the respiratory virus or the pneumonia that you have, your body's working through it. Of course, it's important to treat the inciting event. For example, a 6-year-old who has UTI, just receiving dextrose-containing IV fluids won't fix the issue. You need treatment of your UTI, and you need, your body needs support with energy. Carnitine supplementation is needed. Different clinics might do different things. Different folks may have different experiences, and there are a couple of reasons for this. Carnitine supplementation in MCAD is different from carnitine supplementation in long-chain fatty acid oxidation disorders. In long-chain FAOD, carnitine supplementation is limited to, if you're deficient, then you get, a lower dose in order to support your body. Because excessive amount of long-chain fats can be associated with cardiac rhythm problems. Whereas in MCAD, the principle is the same, that if you're deficient, you get supported with carnitine supplementation. But, for us as well, it's important to keep up with medical literature, because ever so often something comes around that makes you rethink your practice. For example, I've been practiced for 10 years. My previous practice has been, having kids with MCAD on carnitine. The amount of supplementation I would do would depend on their levels. But there was recently a paper published out of the Netherlands in 2021, in which they did a 10-year retrospective chart review of all their MCAD patients and looked at those with MCAD and secondary carnitine deficiency and saw if there were adverse outcomes related to those who were not treated versus those who were treated with carnitine deficiency, with carnitine, and found that there was no significant difference in hospitalizations or rhabdo events or hypoglycemia for MCAD patients. So I think, again, your clinic may do different things, and that certainly, that event certainly made me rethink, what I do for my patients in my clinical practice. So at this point, we tend to, at Colorado, supplement if the carnitine levels are really low, somewhere less than 10 is what we define, but each clinic may be different. So, sorry, that's why I thought carnitine needed like a few moments of its own. Next, please. Okay. So, now we're going into sort of a little bit about specific conditions, keeping a track of time here. Okay. And so MCAD is deficiency of the enzyme that is responsible for beta oxidation of fats that have 6 to 10 carbon atoms. It's a recessive genetic condition, and it's the most common fatty acid oxidation defects. Before the advent of newborn screening, this was thought to be a major reason for SIDS, or sudden infant death, in the fact that you have a 4-month-old healthy term baby, the moment they start sleeping through the night, and, if they have an intercurrent illness, it would be associated with SIDS. Totally preventable, and newborn screening has changed that. So the number one thing that we say for patients with MCAD is avoid fasting. And, breastfeeding. So we support breastfeeding, and it's important, to know that it comes with a few caveats. For example, the newborn screening doesn't come back until day 3 or 4 of life, typically. And, in the beginning, there is there's a time lag for mamas who've nursed and dads who've supported them. There's a time lag between when your milk letdown comes in. And so there's a little bit of gap. So breastfeeding is supported as long as there's adequate breast milk supply and there's no feeding issues, meaning that, for a mom, you feel like your breast feel heavy, 10 to 15 minutes each side, the baby can empty the breast and, feed frequently depending on the size of their last meal, every 1.5 to 2 hours or 2 to 3 hours. If the baby is small for gestational age, low birth weight, or has some feeding difficulties, or there's not enough milk coming in, then your physician may advise, supplement with formula, or, supplement with higher calorie formula, or express the breast milk and feed it so that we know how many ounces. Is it like just 1 ounce? Is it 2 to 3 ounces? Is it 4? So breastfeeding is supported, for MCAD. And then just the importance is, breast milk supply and feeding, which determines what your physician will advise. I often get asked what is the time frame? Because as you can imagine, as your baby starts to sleep during the night, baby's 4 months old, starting to sleep through the night. And for any baby without MCAD, the advice would be, hey, that's great, you're lucky, your baby's sleeping through the night. But if your baby has a fatty acid oxidation defect, don't be lulled into complacency, because that one feed, in the middle of the night is important. Going back to how the body tolerates fasting, as kids grow older, their ability to tolerate a fast increases because they have these other reserves, glycogen reserves and other things, and oxidation of other fatty acids, long chain, that they can use as a source of energy. But prevention is better than going back in time, because sometimes we can't go back in time, well, we can never go back in time and fix things. So we always advise, avoid fasting, wake up your baby at least once at night, to feed them. And typically by the time they are a year, and if they're well, they can tolerate an overnight fast. And the amount of, duration of fasting that they can tolerate increases as they get older. So there is no one size fits all. It depends upon, whether the baby's well or sick, how good was their last meal, and many other factors. Okay. So what happens, if when your kid is now 3 or 4 and has MCAD, should they be on a special diet? Things have really evolved over time, where we now understand that being on a regular diet and getting your, sort of recommended 30 to 35% of your daily energy needs from fats is totally okay for, a child who has MCAD. And so, I advise patients to structure the day as 3 meals: breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks in between. If you have your dinner early at 5 p.m. and your overnight fast is, your child wakes up next morning and eats at 7 or 8, that's a really long overnight fast. So in that case, for people who have early dinner, do a bedtime snack with a complex carbohydrate and protein, or protein. For people who have a late dinner, it's okay, they don't have to do a bedtime snack. Why the complex carbohydrate and protein? Well, these are just things that, so if you think about it this way, if you take a simple sugar, okay, it raises your blood sugar, there's a peak and there's a crash, So simple sugars are great for rescue when there's acute hypoglycemia. But, when you're doing an overnight fast, you don't want these peaks and troughs. What you want is a steady state, where your body sustains your blood sugar. And you can do that with a complex carbohydrate, because it's complex, the body has to work to chop it down, and so there's a sustained release. And the same thing with protein. It's a complex molecule. The body works at it slowly to release, sugar molecules and maintain euglycemia. What would be a complex carbohydrate? Something like oatmeal, granola bar. What would be a protein? It could be, something like a Greek yogurt, or a glass of milk. So simple things, that you can do, that are present in your pantry and in your fridge every day, that are good for snacks for kids. Limit intake of sugars as, to as needed for rescue. Simple sugars, so I advise my patients with MCAD, just because you have MCAD doesn't mean that, you also have to be healthy. So it doesn't mean that, you should be drinking juice, like 8 to 10 ounces of juice, throughout the day. 4 ounces of juice, 15 grams of carbohydrate, great rescue when feeling low, or having hypoglycemia, but not something that you should take throughout the day. As you grow older, the only sort of thing that's advised is, there are lots of fad diets out there, and, an elementary age kid is not somebody who's going to be on a fad diet, more relevant for older kids. But just, if you're using a diet that is rich in medium chain fats, your body's just not going to be able to use it as a source of energy. So there's no toxin created, by this process, but we just can't use it. And then next, please. Cornstarch, has anybody ever used cornstarch for, yes? Okay. And so cornstarch supplementation is controversial, not because it's harmful, but, it usually means if you need cornstarch, then either, you have severe long chain fatty acid oxidation defect, or it means that we can go back and look at the diet and see if, there could be something that could be amended in the diet to avoid reliance. Have I Have I had my patients do cornstarch? Certainly. Those who, despite their best efforts and my best efforts, continue to have fasting hypoglycemia in the morning, I tell them, well, why don't we try cornstarch? But cornstarch is a complex carbohydrate. So you could essentially do the same thing in theory, by using a complex carbohydrate snack or diet. Complex carbohydrates in your diet would be like brown bread instead of white bread, brown rice instead of white rice, those kinds of things. But, life is real. Sometimes it's easier said than done. So it's not harmful. And you can use cornstarch, to prevent fasting hypoglycemia in the morning. Again, it's just simple, like the one that you get, at Walmart. I mean, it's a simple cornstarch off the shelf. It's not medical grade. And the body's it's the same principle. The body has to work to chop it down and release sugar molecules. So you can use it if needed. Again, carnitine supplementations is based on levels. Okay, acute management. Kids get sick a lot. They go to daycare, they get, runny nose, congestion, diarrhea. So the first 2 years of life are hard anyway, with childhood illnesses, and you add on top of that MCAD, it's a recipe for a lot of stress as a parent. It's important for our kids to have normal lives. So, I never advise, don't send your kid to, a daycare or a preschool setting just because they have MCAD, because they need that socialization, they need that stimulation with being with other kids, just living a normal childhood. But, when they get sick, the stakes are higher than other kids. So, whether a child is able to stay home when they're sick or having to come in for dextrose-containing IV fluids depends on what's going on and their general health. For example, if somebody's at the 5th percentile for their weight, I know that they don't have much reserves, as opposed to somebody who's at the 45th or 50th percentile. If they have something just like a runny nose and a low-grade fever but are eating well, they can probably stay home. But if they have a UTI and are vomiting, they need to come in. So it's based on a lot of factors. Call your on-call number on your emergency letter. Next, please. All right. So, in essence, if your baby or child has MCAD, it's basically, we expect them to have a normal childhood with just some special attention to, the sort of the foods that they consume, the timing of fasting, and special attention to when they are sick. Now, transitioning over to long chain fatty acid oxidation defects, which, since it's a mouthful, I'm going to call it LCFAOD for the rest of the talk. Things can be a little bit more tricky here. So it's deficiency of the enzyme that breaks down fats containing 14 to 20 carbon atoms. And then the symptoms can be variable. Now, sort of a new thing has been added here. With MCAD, we talked about hypoglycemia, but now we can get cardiac involvement, we can get skeletal muscle involvement, and we can have enlarged livers. Next, please. And there's some other LCFAODs, for the purpose of time, I sort of did not go into a detail with everyone, but the principles of management are the same. And so, you have LCHAD and the mitochondrial trifunctional protein deficiency, and they can have additional symptoms stacked on top of everything we've discussed. The nerves and the retina, they also use a lot of energy, so you can get retinopathy, you can get peripheral nerve involvement. And then, these are, and at the bottom are disorders of, and these are typically, moderate to severe. They're hard to manage. So with VLCAD, you may have mild symptoms or moderate to severe symptoms, but LCHAD and MTP, they are moderate to severe. And then, you have problems with disorders that are involved in the carnitine shuttle. And you can see, the list is almost the same with some sort of overlap. CACT is probably the most severe, always has a severe presentation, and also has other metabolic abnormalities in addition to hypoglycemia. Okay, so you have a long chain FAOD, can you use a medium chain? Absolutely, and that's one of the principles of treatment, because Medium chains don't need that long chain enzyme to break them down, so you can use them. And medium chains don't need that carnitine shuttle for transport into the mitochondria, so you can use them. Next, please. Next. Okay, so let's spend a couple of minutes talking about what kind of medium chain products are out there. Okay, folks familiar with Dojolvi? Yes. Okay. All right. So this is a traditional sort of model, and here we're moving more into what we do currently. So MCT products, they're just medium chain triglycerides. They contain, again, I'm repeating myself, C6 to C10, and so they're bypassing the enzyme defects. They produce, remember, beta oxidation has to chop down the molecule and until it's all gone. So it produces, this acetyl-CoA molecules. And then the thing is, you can get them as a prescription, a prescription formula when you're younger. But when you're older, you kind of have to transition to over-the-counter products. And when you transition to over-the-counter products, they're not regulated the same way pharmaceutical products are. So you never know. If something says it's pure MCT, does it have 40% or 80%? And, there was a study published that talked about taking a range of MCT products and analyzing them, and they had anywhere from 45% to 83% of medium chain triglyceride content. So as a, if I have a LCFAOD, I go to a GNC store and buy an MCT chew or MCT product. It's anybody's guess how much MCT I'm getting. The formulas are, the medical grade formulas are more regulated. Monogen and Portogen. I just put these two here, but there are other ones as well. They have about 85%, of their fat from medium chain triglycerides. There's also something called progestamil, that is a 55% medium chain triglycerides. And then, you have all these supplements, Liquogen, MCT Procal. The nice thing about MCT Procal is it's a sachet. So it's not because these are oils, you have to drink an oil, right? And so MCT Procal is a sachet or a powder that you can mix into a smoothie, into yogurt. So that's something handy or easier for an older child. And then, of course, coconut oil as a cooking oil has MCT. How is Dojolvi different from MCT products? Well, in essence, it itself is no different. It's a medium chain triglyceride, but here, its chemical composition is different. So you have 6 to 10 even number of carbon atoms, but here, Dojolvi has 7 carbon atoms. So it's an odd number in the biochemical formula. What that odd number does, it performs a function. There's a reason, So it produces acetyl-CoA, which is produced here as well, but it also produces one molecule of propanol-CoA. This propanol-CoA is a 3 carbon atom, bear with me. And it's important because while this can provide energy, this can enter into the energy cycle another way to provide, substrates for another biochemical pathway. So it can improve or have a boosted energy production, okay? It comes as a liquid preparation, and it's now FDA approved for pediatric and adult patients. So it's regulated. Next, please. Okay, and next as well. Okay, so, these are a few examples of meal ideas and recipe tools. This is available online. After I put this up here, I realized that it's from Children's Hospital, Colorado. I'm not plugging it. It's just our nutritionists got together and just sort of, I think they did how to use the MCT oils and the sachets as part of your daily diet for your child, how you could incorporate them. So there are some ideas out there, to help you hide. Sometimes you have to hide, when you have kids into sort of what you're giving them. As they're smart, they figured it out. Next, please. Okay, and this is a brief schematic of Dojolvi because I did not explain the TCA cycle. So this is the TCA cycle here. This is a long chain fat, undergoes, a long chain fat. This is a carnitine shuttle. It's basically, broken down by beta oxidation. Electrons are lost. They go to the chain and produce energy. And then there's this acetyl-CoA. It can do multiple things, including producing energy through this other pathway. But triheptanoin can do both these actions. So it can support this as well as it can support this. Whereas medium chain triglycerides, they sort of only go through this one pathway. Next, please. Okay. This has been in use of triheptanoin. Now, anytime we think that a product may be useful for our patients, well, we have to prove it, right? We have to prove it that it does what we think it does. So, this is published just recently in 2023, triheptanoin for the treatment of LC-FAOD. And what this study looked at was, and some of the people on this paper are here as speakers, and you know them. But what this study looked at was the incidence of LC-FAOD related adverse events, so hypoglycemia, rhabdocardiomyopathy in patients who were and were not on triheptanoin. So basically, previously, their charts were reviewed from previously what was going on with them when they were not on a supplement, and they were put on a supplement for extended period of time. And then it was found that for those who were triheptanoin naive, which means that they had never received triheptanoin, there was an 83% reduction in the annual rate of, the adverse events, which I just discussed. For those who had been, there was also an arm of the study that looked at outcomes in people who had already been on triheptanoin as part of some other clinical trial and what happened to them as, time went along. And it was found that they had a sustained decrease in the incidence of adverse events. Okay, next, please. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit. I just realized I'm almost out of time. Okay, so nutritional management is based on, your disease severity. In the past, and in my last 10 years, the management was, if you had VLCAD, you couldn't breastfeed because breast milk contains long chain fats. Breast milk is a reflection of, what a mom eats, right? That gets transported into the breast milk. And so in the past, the wisdom was that if you have, LC-FAOD, you can't breastfeed. You have to be on one of these, special formulas that I discussed with you before. We've been full cord press. But as time has gone along, we've realized we've backed off, and we've realized that, as long as you avoid fasting, there isn't really that need to be so aggressive in patients who have mild disease. How do we decide who has mild and severe disease? It's very nuanced, but one of the things that has helped us is genetic testing. So, we now know that there are certain genetic mutations that are associated with mild disease, and mild disease means they have good amount of residual enzyme activity. We know that there are certain genetic mutations in the ACAD-VL gene that are associated with cardiomyopathy. So we know those will have severe disease. And we know that there are certain genetic mutations that are going to be associated with adult onset rhabdomyolysis. So we use that information to sort of figure out, who's going to be mild, who's going to be severe. And the wisdom has now changed into, yes, you can breastfeed. It can be ad lib or express breast milk, again, based on MCAD, how often your birth weights, milk supply, weight gain, general health, etc. Whether, you're going to supplement with a regular formula versus formula rich in MCT just really depends upon, again, general health. Even people with mild disease can be symptomatic when adequately stressed. And so, for example, you could have a child who's 4 years old who is mild VLCAD, but, is now started to play T-ball. And every time, that kiddo goes out there, gets rhabdo, then your metabolic clinic is probably going to recommend we should add some MCT to the supplement, MCT to the regimen here. And it's important to distribute it equally throughout the day. Next, please. Okay, for a toddler who's transitioning off of infant formula, again, we want them to have a regular diet. 3 meals, 3 snacks in between, special attention to fasting, when sick and when well. MCT supplementation, again, is based on your clinic recommendations, which is based on, if your child has mild to severe disease. And then carnitine supplementation is just based on the levels. Next, please. Okay. What happens when you have severe VLCAD? Severe VLCAD means that you do need some degree of dietary modification from the go. And why is that? It's because your body's just not able to use the long chain fats that are coming in and convert that into energy. So, typically a regular diet contains 30 to 35% of fats, of your energy need from fats. And these energy needs are defined by your age, your gender, and your weight. So now, the energy from long chain fats is to be decreased to 10%. You can't get rid of them. So one question may be, why not just remove them from your diet? They're ubiquitous, and they perform important function for the brain, for the retina, for the skin. So it's not possible to completely remove them. So a regimen for an infant who has severe VLCAD would look like either express breast milk or formula, plus an MCT containing formula, or Dojolvi, plus essential fatty acid supplementation, which comes from walnut or flaxseed oil. Why do we need essential fatty acids? They're long chain fats, and their deficiency can cause alopecia. It can cause poor wound healing. It can cause developmental delay because they're also needed for the brain. And a toddler, older child would now have a low-fat formula, such as Tolerex. Low-fat formula means high carb content in the formula. MCT oil or Dojolvi, and then essential fatty acid supplementation. Plus now, since they're eating food, allowance of grams of fat from solid food. Okay. And so it's important while you're doing, so they have a modified diet from the get-go. Your clinic will also monitor your essential fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins. Next, please. Acute management is the same. You need supportive care with dextrose-containing IV fluids, and you need treatment that's specific to the symptoms that you have. For example, if you're hypoglycemic, you need a bolus. If you have rhabdo, you need hydration to prevent acute renal failure. If you have cardiomyopathy, instead, you need fluid restriction because your heart can't pump, so you can't pump your body full of fluid. So it depends on what your team will decide. Next, please. Okay. Introducing sports. Introducing sports. So it's important, we always support our kids having a normal, healthy life. And we encourage kids to participate in normal physical activity for age, and rec sports and team sports as tolerated. They need a regular diet, 3 meals and snacks. Important here is pre-workout or pre-game snack, which has complex carb protein or MCT oil, whatever your clinic advises. Maintain hydration during the game, post-workout, snack and hydration. Rescue with simple carbs, 4 ounces of juice or 15 M&Ms give 15 grams of carbohydrates, which is good for the rescue. And then, pay attention to symptoms. If it's causing too much pain and your kid needs to sit it out, their body is telling them something and you something. Next, please. Okay. Could you move through this one? All right. So there are multiple people, and the burden of living with LC-FAOD is long. It involves your primary care physician, metabolic physician, nutritionist, cardiologist, ophthalmologist, neurologist is needed, and also, next please, your local ER. So, those ER letters are important. Next, please. And lastly, the impact on our kids. Next, please. Because they're the ones, for whom this is a lived experience. And next, please. All right. This is not something that's really well studied, but these two, these two studies looked at the impact on parents and caregivers or older patients with LC-FAOD. And it was done through interviews, talking to the patients, their families, as well as talking to the clinicians. And there's a significant impact in quality of life, in ability to do activities of daily living, in the social emotional impact of having an LC-FAOD. And so, next, please. The kind of challenges a person could face is you have multiple medical appointments for your kids. You have to explain the diagnosis to grandma, grandpa, extended people. Is your child safe at birthday parties, sleepovers, and camps? And of course, it's easier to manage diet in infancy. It's harder when they're older and they have a mind of their own. So should we allow our kids to fail and then they'll get it, as we do with parenting? And, now it starts turning from a medical issue to a parenting issue, because for so many things, we'll let our kid sort of figured it out that, if they didn't listen to mom or dad, these are the consequences, and they will think better next time. But the stakes are high. Sometimes the symptoms are reversible. You didn't take your pre-game snack, and now you have cramps during your game. You sit it out, you know better the next time. But sometimes, the outcome is more severe. Being very fussy or being very sort of confrontational, about, grams of fat from food as kids grow older, or refusal to take their supplement if they have cardiomyopathy, could land them a long-term hospitalization. Next, please. Okay, so there is no one size fits all. Sorry, I wanted to go through each one of them slowly, but we're also almost out of time. The number one thing, this is a lifelong thing, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So the most important thing is acceptance, first by the parents, because, when you accept and embrace the diagnosis and make peace, your children can sense that, and that is a pathway for them to accept their diagnosis as they grow older. It's important to have education. And so what do? Important to have education for kids about their diagnosis, education about food labels, what they can, what they can't, how to read a food label, what would be a healthy snack for them. It's important for kids to have that education early on so that they can be empowered when they're in situations where they're independent to make good choices. I used to take care of a young lady with BLCAD who, maybe did not have access to these things. And so, she knew she couldn't fast. And so every 2 hours, she would have a Snickers bar. And eventually, for that person, weight management and obesity became an issue. And so it's important to educate our kids early on. When you're having fats, choose heart-healthy fats in the diet versus saturated fats. Nut butters, fish, avocados, these are some examples. These are all long-chain fats, okay? But remember, you can't eliminate long-chain fats from your body, and you have to have a balance of, making sure that your overall health is healthy. Next, please. Limit intake of sugary foods, candy, sugary beverages, unless used as a rescue. Our kids can have their cookies and their ice cream, it's a childhood. That's what makes a childhood. But, having it in mind that just because you have a FAOD and you need sugar all the time, that's a wrong concept. So to move away from that, because having a lot of sugary foods impacts their health negatively. And then it's important, there's a dietary change that has to be made for everybody. How your pantry is stocked, what's on your dinner table, helps your child have acceptance with their diagnosis. Next, please. Can go through, as kids are growing older, using familiarity with food labels, using measuring cups and spoons to measure portions. Instead of fried foods, choosing baked, broiled, steamed, or grilled as much as possible. Because remember, like frying uses, vegetable oils, which are all long chain, and, frying also converts fats into saturated. You can use medium chain cooking fats for patients with LC-FAOD. You can use fitness apps like MyFitnessPal for tracking grams of fat. Sometimes it can be fun for older kids, to have their own fitness app and put things in. And then, encourage regular physical activity and participation in sports and team sports as tolerated. So support, we support our kids having a normal childhood, doing everything that they would with just education and attention to what they have and some life hacks so that they make good choices as they're older. And then, give yourself grace and give your kids grace. There are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days, but this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And so, it takes a while. Next, please. All right. With that, I conclude my talk. And I apologize. I think we started about 5-6 minutes late, so I didn't leave time for questions.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kochhar. Yes, we can at least allow 5 minutes or so for questions, and I can just come around if you want to pop your hands up if you have any questions for Dr. Kochhar. Anyone? Okay, well, I do actually have a question if you guys want to think. You mentioned on one of the slides, I think for specifically the long chain, the VLCATs, about the stage where they are off of the infant formula. And I just wanted to know your thoughts and experiences with kiddos that are still taking, that are well above the infancy phase and still taking a metabolic formula. My son is 7 and still is. And from what we've heard, this will be his milk for life, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything out there now that's suggesting, and maybe I know it's probably patient to patient, right? But as we are getting older and having some difficulty getting all of it in and him remembering at school and the teacher, it's become a bit of a stressor outside of our home.
Yeah.
So just wondering if there's anything out there new that suggests maybe there are some alternatives to kids that maybe have a more severe, VLCAT that still need that, but can do so in a different way.
Yeah. For our older kids who do need formula in order to meet their daily energy needs, we have the struggle that you mentioned. And so we've used the problem with using infant formula, even when you're older, is that, the calorie content of infant formula is much higher than the calorie content for, somebody who's 5 or 6. So a sort of early childhood or juvenile formula is different from infant formula in terms of its calorie content and in terms of, the micronutrients that it provides. So I think your metabolic dietitian is probably paying attention to not overload, your son from calories. The other thing that we've used is, carbohydrate-based formulas like Tolerex, and then we have this concoction where we have a carb formula, and we have Dojobi, and, we have essential fatty acid and DHA supplement. But I think the question, so there are other things that you can mix and match, but I think the question is, that cognitively our kids are smart and they know what's going on. So there is a rejection of whatever you may choose to give, right? Is that what you're facing?
It's that, and I think it's just the sheer ounces. I mean, he's probably 20 or so ounces of that on top of like a Gatorade mixed with MCT oil, so just getting down the actual ounces is what's.
You should look at, if you can, the purpose is to maintain. So whatever his total calorie needs are, the goal is to meet like 30% of calories from fat. And then, your dietitian is probably divided. This much can come from MCT and this much can come from long chains. And so looking at some things like the MCT ProCal, which is a sachet powder, and there are lots of recipes in there, just making a smoothie or making like muffins or things like that in order to decrease your dependence on ounces. So I think this is very relevant, decreasing the total volume, because it probably fills him up and he doesn't want to eat solid food, right? And so, yes, we do tend to work towards increasing acceptable fat content of solid foods that we eat so we can go down on the formula volume. We can talk afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
My question is, when I learned about MCAT first, the websites that popped up were like from the UK, and the UK uses an emergency regimen. And I was just wondering why the US doesn't do that as much or seems to at all.
What was it, an emergency regimen to use at home?
Yeah.
Okay, was it like mix this many tablespoons of sugar with?
I think it's like a oral dextrose thing.
Okay, an oral rescue.
Yeah, oral rescue.
Okay. We have that at our clinic. I think you've asked a very good question. There's no perfect answer, but we do have, and I'm sure other clinics across the country also have, sort of in their emergency protocol for people who can stay home when they're sick. We don't use that polymer, but we take Gatorade or Pedialyte and mix it with this much and, these many tablespoons of sugar, and then do that. But over the years, I myself, personally have also moved away from that. And the reason is that sometimes it can give a false sense of security, for families, that things are okay as long as I'm following this regimen at home. And many times it's okay. Things are okay till they're not. And it's probably the reason why, folks have moved away from it. Because if you have a short-term illness, runny nose, congestion, it may be very well okay to use that at home. If you have a more serious illness, then, your people might want you to come in.
Well, I always just wanted it. I live in Nebraska,
Okay.
and Nebraska has hospital. My nearest hospital is, of course, 10 minutes, but I can go to grandma's house, and it's 30 minutes to the nearest hospital, no matter where I go. So I'm like, how can the advice be the same when the time difference
can.
is so
Yeah.
like, does that make sense? Like, I'd
It
like
makes
to use
100%
it. I'd like to
sense.
use it when I'm going to the hospital and be like,
Yeah.
okay, well, at least I can try something while
Yeah.
we're in the car 30 minutes.
Yeah.
out,
It
you
makes
know?
100% sense. And, that's why on one of the slides I put up that there's no one size fits all. So, for someone like you who lives away from like a medical center and it's going to take a while, it's probably not safe, for you to be sort of knowing that you could be hypoglycemic or having an event and then taking that time from the ambulance or driving. You do need some type of rescue.
That's why it always made me nervous, because I was like, well, what do I do? I mean, of course, now my daughter's like 1 and will take Gatorade or whatever. But when she was like a baby and they are able to, it's like, can I try Gatorade with the baby, or is that unsafe? Or I don't know.
Gatorade probably has too many electrolytes, so from that aspect, but something like an orange juice or a prune juice, 4 ounces
Oh yeah,
would
apple
be
juice.
apple juice. Yes, exactly. Yeah. 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 I hear you, the Europeans make us look bad.